Welcome back to our panel discussion, Better Customer Experience Builds Trust in Government, sponsored by Genesis here on Federal News Network. My guests today are Kenneth Corbin. He's the Chief Taxpayer Experience Officer at the IRS. Andy Lewandowski is Digital Experience Advisor to the Federal CIO at the Office of Management and Budget. Stephen Boberski, Senior Business Development Executive for the Public Sector at Genesis, and Barbara Morton, the Deputy Chief Veterans Experience Officer at the Department of Veterans Affairs, and I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. And I want to talk about just a little practical matter here, and that is the data that we've been discussing has to be held securely. We touched briefly on FedRAMP, but just if we will, and again, we'll start with Andy maybe this time from the OMB perspective, there must be a really strong security imperative for all of these things, both for cybersecurity and for the fact that trust really does depend on it.
That's right. So our federal CX vision, again, is that when the public interacts with the government, they should get a simple, seamless, and secure experience. We have to use technology in order to design and deploy technologies and services and systems that are secure by design. So let me just say that again, everything has to be secure by design. So we're looking to the federal CIO community, chief technology officers, and other technology leaders to partner with the high impact service providers and the folks who are on the ground doing public facing service delivery to make sure that each interaction, each touch point is secure by design. I think something that is a focus with our cross-agency life experience work that was announced last month is this concept of data sharing. And I actually don't think data sharing is the right term, because in many cases, the information is not actually leaving systems inside of agencies. So what we can do is you can build microservices or little checks that validate someone's birthday without actually passing that information across the system or across an agency. So the 5 cross-agency life experiences that are currently in research and discovery phase right now, the teams are going to be documenting these issues. When someone is approaching retirement and they need to apply for both Medicare and then Social Security, how do we make that simple, seamless, and secure front stage? It's the 10% that they experience from their point of view by securely using systems and technology backstage, which is the 90% that they don't see.
And I just wanted to ask Ken Corbin a question about the idea of access here, because one of the implications that's kind of been behind everything we've said is that everybody has maybe high-speed internet or they have smart devices and so forth. But the reality is in the United States, everybody does not. And so how does that figure into this whole question of making sure everyone has equal customer experience?
So we believe that federal government has an obligation of service to one and service to all. And so as we think about that digital divide, part of what we think good experience comes from is creating tools so that our communities, our partners within the communities that do have access to internet or smart tablets, but also have the trust of their community leaders and those who they serve who will come to them for help and advice, are able to equipped with the tools that not only can give them the access to the information, but secure access to the information. And so a good example of that is through our Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program, or VITA. We were able to work with our community partners to create a virtual VITA program. It allowed community members who may not have access to the internet or to a digital device to be able to go to a trusted partner to be able to help file their tax returns during this pandemic through a virtual and safe environment. And so it was building these kinds of bridges that I think really helps federal government, and absolutely agree that, our information, what the knowledge that the federal government has is our biggest asset, and we have to protect that.
Barbara, then the implication that I'm hearing from what Ken said is that as we design these systems with the approaching person in mind, you have to have more than one given model, because you just can't go around assuming everyone has a smart tablet or a smartphone.
I mean, indeed. I mean, we certainly have that digital divide, if you will, as Ken mentioned at VA, where you've got some older generations of veterans who may not be as comfortable with digital. And so I think the challenge, but also the opportunity is, again, how do we understand different segments of our population that we serve and sort of meet them where they are and understand their preferences? And it kind of goes back to that data collection in terms of, would you prefer to have something in traditional mail or via email? So I think there's so much opportunity for us to make those adaptations, again, back to that personalization, those preferences based on what veterans and their families are telling us. But security, 1000% is an imperative. It's certainly something that we want to make sure is not cumbersome, to Andy and Ken's point, to the user. You don't want to have multiple different logins in the digital space, if you will, and other validations. So want to make the actual experience of having a secure interaction to be seamless as well.
And that gets to the idea of that human-centered design that results from the journey mapping we've been talking about. I know all the words here, but actually how to put it into practice. So you need to have, I think Andy mentioned, Stephen mentioned the term personas when approaching this. Is that how you look at it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, right. And really kind of, again, goes back to what Andy had mentioned before. I think putting ourselves in the shoes of our various customers. And the only way, in my opinion, to do that is to deeply understand them through human-centered design as a practice, which is really just a fancy way of saying, talk to your customers and see what their journey is. Don't sort of assume that take a step back and absorb the different information that they're sharing with you to then kind of create these insights, which can drive and operationalize those changes.
And so, Stephen, my impression then is, again, from the Genesis standpoint, that this is not something simply for the CIO or OCIO staff to do. It's not simply for the programs to do, but it seems like you really need a multidisciplinary approach on the CX front, rather.
Oh, absolutely. It's a complete unified portfolio as far as what it touches in the technology side of the house when it comes to access, authentication, service delivery, presentation. Certainly human-centered design and what is shown and how it's interacted is important, but creating that ecosystem that we talked about before is the challenge. When you see something like FedRAMP, when you see agencies being able to securely connect to each other in a fashion that is approved and common, using the same control sets, for example, there's always going to be deltas, differences in how they apply their technology. But there is a growing ecosystem that's enabling two-factor authentication to be shared through agencies. It started with HSPD-12 and some common access badges, but that core system has been extended to access for IT systems across the board. So we're seeing those type of things. And also, while we're talking about access and the digital divide, I will say, when it comes to trust and adding trust and being able to, the agencies put themselves in their shoes, we all know that telework and remote work access has become sort of a standard during COVID, but what it also, the technology and this access and enablement is allowing people to do is hire people they weren't able to hire before. And you're able to grab a part of the population that might resonate with a specific constituency that they may not have accessed before, right? Because you had to be located near a contact center where you would want to work. Someone that's very remote that would identify with some people in a specific region might not have been able to participate as an agent, and now you have representation and diversity, and all those things build trust, because now you're improving the quality of the experience by resonating directly with your agents. And I would think that that's kind of important.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. It gets back to something I think Andy said earlier. The CX then really, from a PMA standpoint, does impinge on another element of the PMA, and that's developing the federal workforce. So it seems like there's some training, education, and general experiential issues in this whole area that has to be reflected in the workforce work.
That's right. And I may sound like a broken record at this point, Tom, but everything comes back to our customer journey. In my experience in designing and building digital products in government, when we deeply understand that front stage experience, each interaction touch point that the customer has with government, then our work backstage as a workforce gets much easier. So in many cases, technology systems are procured by vendors or they are designed by technology contractors, and they happen in a vacuum because they're trying to meet maybe a compliance need or a statutory requirement coming from the Hill or a modernization initiative, but they're not thinking in many cases globally. How is this one system fitting in to the overall customer journey? What phase of the journey is it serving? Is it serving the phase where you are discovering benefits and services online? For example, we know the majority of users come to us through search engines. So if our content is not properly designed by content strategists to be search engine optimized, that will have a direct impact on our call center volume. If customers cannot get the authoritative information from the government that only we can provide in the way that they want it, then that can have impacts on other parts of the business. So the key thing is that everything's integrated and everything's connected. And so I'm really challenging the technologists in the federal space. That includes our federal CIO teams, chief technology officers, CISOs, other security leaders, and our federal technology contracting community to put yourself in the customer's shoes. And let's make those systems on the back end map to how our customers experience our services, not how we are managing our programs or budgets or compliance activities.
Barbara?
Yeah, and I think, ditto to what Andy was saying. And I think, people might sort of wonder, well, what's the art of possible? How might we ensure that happens? And I think there are kind of a couple of approaches to that. One, again, goes back to the practice of human-centered design. And for, our communities out there, our partners in the private sector, thinking about, how might you include human-centered design in any of your responses to, requests for information that come your way from government. Same thing on the government side. How might we, from the inside, make human-centered design as a core requirement? So we're not just checking a box trying to get a system launched just to get it launched. We've got to do that design work up front, or else we're going to pay for it down the road.
Right. And then, Ken, at the back end, then it might be that as something, the approach might be something that Andy described as, don't try to do a full-scale systems integration, but use microservices and calls among applications and data, such that you don't need to transplant everything from one place to the other.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that a lot of our taxpayers and customers expect is they want to know where the benefits are. Where do they see the changes? And that is something that I think that if you take a step back as you implement a technology and then figure out where it fits, how it phases in to the different components of the journey. And the other thing that I would say to all of the listeners is you are a part of the experience. When you interact with the federal government and you get that opportunity to provide a feedback or answer a survey, take that opportunity. That's how you're able to help participate in us getting it right and making sure that that journey and us stepping in your shoes, that we are matching that.
And by the way, do those surveys, if they come in on a mass scale, how do you analyze them? Because it may not be possible to read all of them. And is there a way of making sure that something horrible that you might need to know about gets flagged? Like, whoa, what happened in that case?
So there are a number of ways that surveys are used, and it really is, surveys are a component of us being able to measure the experience. We do a lot of things such as call center analytics. So we listen and monitor and root out through calls to figure out what are some of the key words that we're hearing from our customers when they're interacting with us, as in conjunction with the surveys, which, as we try and design the surveys across federal government to ask that fundamental question around trust, that is a driver for us to really dig in deep, get behind the data, and actually work with and listen to the customer to see what is that point, what is that delta that we can improve. So I think surveys are a part of our journey, but also I think doing that data mining through the different experiences, and also just talking with our employees, by the way, which really understand what customers are saying to them, and they really can help us design better experiences for them.
So, Stephen, it sounds like one of the important components in a customer experience journey is almost a dashboard, so that you make sure everything you need to capture is in fact captured, and in a way that people can do something useful with it.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And it's, data analytics, and, when you talk about customer journey mapping and how to present that, not only to the agent so that it can be empathetic during a call, but also how to change the experience based on the data you gather is probably the number one challenge in the federal space today, because again, there's so much data and this is emerging technology. And, Andy hit on something I think everybody's touched on it, which is, there are many initiatives, right? Everybody beats transition versus transformation to death, right? But there is a habit in the federal space, sometime for expediency, sometime for comfort, sometime for just budget. This is how I've been doing it. I'd like to do it with something new, but I want to do the same thing, right? So this transformation concept of, we try to encourage this experience as a service. It really is focusing on the customer end of this experience, not just the technology. Technology is an enabler. The reason many things have been done the way they've been done is as quickly as technology has been implemented, there's a habit of the federal government saying, this is how I've been doing it. Here's my proposal. I want the newest toys, but I want to continue to do what I'm doing. They're not doing the best practice of business functions beget, business requirements beget functional requirements. Functional requirements beget technical requirements. Don't start with, I want IVRs, I want AI, I want the newest technology, multi-channel. It is, what are you trying to do? What's the objective? When you start with that experience as the center and the business function and the requirements, and then you derive technical requirements from that, that's what we're trying to do. That's how you transform. This habit of moving what you have, migrating, lift and shift, or even just transitioning, it's got to stop. But when they do that transformation, sometimes they focus on the right. It's all about the experience. It's not about the technology.
So in other words, envision the house before you buy the lumber, sounds like.
Absolutely.
Barbara, final word?
I mean, wholeheartedly agree. I think we're at an incredible moment in time in our journey together in government and supported by our partners externally too. And the focus of putting the human at the center and not serving the bureaucracy first, serving the human first, the public first, is really where this transformation is taking us.
All right, fantastic note to end on. I want to thank today's guest. Barbara Morton is the Deputy Chief Veterans Experience Officer for the Department of Veterans Affairs. Andy Lewandowski is the Digital Experience Advisor to the Federal CIO at the Office of Management and Budget. Ken Corbin is the Chief Taxpayer Experience Officer at the IRS. And Stephen Boberski is the Senior Business Development Executive for the Public Sector at Genesis. I'm Tom Temin. You're listening to Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, please visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Genesis.
On behalf of Genesis, thank you for joining us. The archive session will be available shortly. If you qualify for continuing education credit, you'll receive an email with your training certificate. This concludes our discussion. Thank you.